It's Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. As you can see from the caption on the screen, we are discussing joint ventures in Nigeria's oil and gas industry and the challenges pertaining thereto. We will still have our guests with us at the Ibadan Network Center and here with us also in the Abuja studios. But let's return to Dr. Oji Bunaya Oji, the Director of Communications of NAITI, again to clarify this whole issue of joint venture cash costs. It's the one that is most often reported in the media. And just about 3 months ago, in June 2016, while he was still Group Managing Director of NNPC, as well as Minister of State for Petroleum, Dr. Ibe Kachuku said that NNPC was owing some $7 billion in joint venture cash costs. But NAITI reports that between 2009 and 2011, $16 billion was deducted for cash costs, and almost 100% more than the cash costs from 2006 to 2008. Again, for the benefit of our viewers, do the cash costs, indebtedness and so on and so forth, are they now beginning to look like our national debt? Before we had a debt forgiveness, at some point we never knew how much we were owing, and the basis, for such indebtedness.
The cash call is governed by what they call the Joint Operating Agreement, JOA. And in that agreement, the responsibilities of all the JV family are clearly specified. What you need to do and when you need to do them, and the implication of failure to do what you need to do. So the Joint Operating Agreement specifies all this. And as soon as, if it's your time, when it's the time for you to pay in your own part of the cash call and you delay, there's implication. And this implication has revenue cost implication. And that's what we're talking about. And it piles up and puts government at a very, very huge disadvantage. When I mean government, because we are liable to pay for these debts. They are piled up as, when I say the cash call is usually in debt, we discovered that by the time government is paying, government is also paying with interest, and it has revenue. You see, our own the legitimate interest in NAITI in all of this is for revenues from the natural resources to work for the Nigerian people. And how can it work for the Nigerian people? If we are able to block the leakages, and government is able to have a higher tech, to increase government tech in the revenue, because by the time most of these revenues go into servicing debts that could have been avoided, you end up having less revenue than you ought to from the sharing arrangement within the joint venture. I think when Dr. Idrisu was speaking, he said he made comments about the 90 audit. And I think it's important to clarify. Our audit process is agency, cover entities driven. What do I mean by this? We design a template. The template is a suite of questions like a questionnaire that we send to the companies that pay in the money to government, or the companies operating within a threshold that's set up for that audit. We also send the same suite of templates to those government agencies that receive either warehouse, manage, or receive the funding. This includes the FIRS, this includes the DPR, this includes the NNPC, the Office of the Accountant General, and all the basic subsidiaries that are covered by our process. And at the end of the return of the templates, where they supply this information, the key information required in the process, we have a validation meeting where the agencies and the company sit. The company A paid this, and company B paid this. Government agencies responsible receive this, so we validate. So by the time we are releasing our report, all the companies that participated in the process, including the NNP, they sign off on the report. They sign off on the report. And therefore, whenever we release our report, we are releasing a report that is owned by the agencies. So there is no thing like misconception around it. And this information, sorry, is very important to establish from onset that the credibility of our reports are solidly on granite. It's not something that we talk about. I think it's important to emphasize that all of us here agree that the management of the joint venture over the years has derailed and has put a lot of financial burden on government. And what we need to be talking is not trying to build our fences to begin to defend our various, because we're all Nigerians. The joint venture the cash call management in Nigeria at the moment, 90 has raised red flag that a lot of water has passed under the bridge.
I was wondering, Dr. Budaya Oji, just before, I have a follow-up question, but just to indicate that we have some tweets that have come in already. We'll take those tweets presently from our viewers. We could say that while we are still on the role of Naiti, Dr. Dirisu and Professor Eledare, they both made a point. Professor Eledare says, look, it would appear that the management of joint venture accounts, particularly with regard to cash calls, cannot be efficiently handled via appropriation. Dr. Dirisu also says that the National Assembly, from time to time, in its own wisdom, decides on what to take on board or what to take out, and some of these things will have implications. What is the interface between Naiti and the National Assembly with regard to the frequent default of the Nigerian government in meeting its cash call obligations?
Well, I don't think we have our mandate covers telling the National Assembly what to do, or when to pass the budget or when not to pass the budget. As also a government agency, we also go to the National Assembly for appropriation. So the NNPC and those who manage the cash call need also to find a way to manage around that. I don't think that is within within our mandate to dictate to National Assembly how to manage that. So, but what we are saying that any delay has financial consequences in terms of debt burden on government. That's the point we've made very clearly.
All right, let's take some of the tweets right away. Ibrahim Tudu says, why do our ventures not incorporate review mechanisms? We need to review and rejig our partnerships for transparency and accountability. A nation can enslave its citizens in an agreement.
And she too says, I appreciate the efforts of Naiti in improving the operations of oil industries in Nigeria, but the challenges of security is quite high.
And Agidi Onisemos tweets, how have JVCs contributed to the growth of our economy?
And John Goodluck says, why is the cash call account always in the red?
And then we have this one from Gambo Zinktim. It says, no doubt some of the terms of JVAs are complex and complicated, but I can categorically state that the federal government benefited a lot.
And Dosumu Shagun says, government alone can't do everything, but it's a shame that JVs has done us more harm than good lately. Corruption has eaten deep down. Well, those are some of your tweets that are coming in. Remember, you can still join us in discussion at NTA GMN. Well, Dr. Evans Dirisu, I know you'd like to speak to some of the issues that he has raised, but there's some school of thoughts of the view that some of these multinationals have also taken advantage of the loopholes in this agreement. And that brings us to the question, does NNPC have the capacity to manage JV agreements?
Good question. That's a very good question, very pertinent too. You agree with me that joint venture arrangements did not originate from Nigeria. They exist elsewhere. In other countries, they exist between governments, agencies, and private investors, and they exist amongst private partnerships. You know, they have a framework. They have a general way of, legal framework for operating them. You can't say that joint venture arrangements are not tools that you can successfully execute. But that question, let me come back to your question. NNPC has NAPIMS. NAPIMS, from my experience, don't have the manpower to be able to effectively monitor JV operations, let alone add production sharing contracts, a lot of them which have now come on stream. They don't have that capacity. That is obvious. They don't have the manpower, they don't have the technological. In NAPIMS, you try to follow the international company's level of competence. They are very, very competent. If you are an NNPC employee working in NAPIMS, you will have to raise your bar to be able to function at all, attend meetings and all that. And by the way, OPCON, which is the operating committee, take the Shell joint venture, the NNPC SPDC joint venture. It's made up of about 12 people, 6 of which must come from NNPC, 4 from Shell, 2 from ELF, and 1 each from the other partners. That is the operating committee. That committee is responsible for budgeting and processing and ensuring that the whole operation is working. Now, if that committee looks at everything they have, all the information at their disposal, and they prepare a budget, you take that budget out, it goes to the NNPC headquarters, they review, and before you put it to the assembly, and now they tell you that all you're doing is wrong, or it's incorrect, or it's, to me, there's a lot of things wrong in our processes. It is not that the joint ventures are not useful. You cannot do without them. I think one other thing you can do is what has been said since 2008, incorporate the joint ventures along the model of LNG. And if you do that, it means that you will not put that proviso there that NNPC will take up operatorship of the joint venture at any point in time. That is not what is envisaged with NLNG. And that clause was inserted there in order to develop the capacity of Nigerians in being able to take over operatorship and run the oil industry. But now that you have something like MPDC, maybe we can channel our effort there and then look at it. When you incorporate, you may not have that need to closely monitor or police the activities of the joint venture companies. You may not have that need, the same way that you don't have in NLNG. Otherwise, what would have been ideal would have been you put NNPC, that is NAPIM's personnel, in the joint venture, you embed them so that they see, and they online, technologically they can see decisions being taken, how they are affecting profitability, and then take measures, appropriate measures, to ensure that, these things are. But again, let me mention about the audit. My colleague here, Dr. Oji, talked about. Are you implying that you carried out an audit and that they signed off that liability and agreed that your figures are correct?
Well,
these are international oil companies.
I'm wondering, Dr. Dirisu.
I'm not holding brief for anyone.
Yeah, Dr. Dirisu, that's we've talked about the necessity of the audit and probably what the challenges might also be perhaps with the audit. One of our is here is address some of those points. Now we're looking for the way forward. And you've touched on some very key points. As one also identified by Professor Eledare, there would appear to be some capacity challenges within the NNPC, which is why my question now is going to Professor Eledare at our Ibadan Network Center. Well, Dr. Dirisu is talking about incorporating a joint venture. Are you going to be having a new corporate entity for each joint venture you are getting into? I mean, LNG is a very specialized kind of arrangement. So what, in your opinion, will be the way forward? Capacity is a major challenge. With tearing down the NNPC as it is now be a solution?
Well, again, I appreciate being here, and and my colleagues, I do sincerely respect their opinion as well. I have concern with IJV, but before I address the IJV concern that I have, let me quickly touch on capacity. I feel offended when people say we don't have capacity to do stuff in Nigeria. I feel offended, and I can tell you why. 36 years ago, I was a young man, a West Side petroleum engineer, drilling oil in Nigeria, and the company representative and very many of my colleagues. One of the problems we did was we wasted a generation. Let's take NAPIMS. Let's look at the number of people that have been head of NAPIMS from 1990 now compared to those who were head of NAPIMS previously. When you yank somebody who is 50 years, 55 years, and just announced on the television that you retire in. What do you expect? Go and look at the number of people. Yesterday was my birthday. I was 65 years old yesterday, and I'm still running all over Nigeria to give public education on energy. Could you imagine so many of my colleagues who are still capable of doing that? So the government is the one to be blamed for the way they retire competent people in the oil and gas industry. And that's what we are paying for today. Let me also talk about NNPC management over the years. In 5 years, we have 5 GMDs. With President Buhari now, we've already had 2 GMD. How many are we going to have before it goes? So those are the issues. We have capable people that can run this industry and run it well. But do we engage them? I told you before, in those days before you go to nappings, you must have significant experience before you can participate and talk to international companies who are always bringing their best, but we keep yanking them off in their prime age. And those are the issues. The governance of the oil and gas industry must be devoid of political expediency. You must put round peg in round hole if you want it to benefit the nations. Now let's come to IJV. You have 6 international companies, I think, operating JV with Nigeria. Are you going to have 6 IJV companies for each of the assets? And if you have IJV companies with Nigeria having the majority share, whose culture are you going to be promoting out there when you go to have loans? Now you say in the operating committee you have 6 NNPC representatives, 4 Shell, one of some. Who carries the weight? Who do you send to go and represent the government in each of these IJV? LNNG survived because of many things: governance, rule of law, rational economic behavior. Those are things that are ingredient to survival. Go to Saudi Arabia, Saudi Aramco. Recently they changed their board. Who did they put on the board? No. Who's going to be on the board of IJVs that you are going to form? Are they going to be political people with political godfathers who have no international reputation to go and borrow money from international banks? These are fundamental issues. And that's why, and I can own up to it, an institutional governance bill that will take us to the next level was debated by people who had no personal interest except national interest. So those are the issues with respect to going forward. We need to look for competent people to be able to protect this, what I call scarce resources. Not every nation are endowed with these resources that we have. And we manage it well, though, from 1970 to around 1990 and 1995. People don't believe there was a time Nigeria was making money from refinery. So what went wrong? As you say, is governance and weak institutions. When you have one person in charge of commercial with respect to oil and gas industry, that same person is in charge of regulation, and that same person is in charge of policy. You don't see that anywhere in the world. And that's one of the reasons why we are becoming inefficient, ineffective, inequitable, and unethical in the oil and gas industry. And the way forward is a strong institutions, both regulatory and policy, as well as commercial. And the Supreme Court, and I'm quoting Avuru now, gave the opportunity for NNPC to operate as a commercial entity when they said no line item charge in federation account, which means actually Supreme Court expects NNPC to remit dividend after they've taken care of the cost. And that's the way forward. Now, IJV, 6 IJVs, I think we have to be careful with respect to the culture that you are going to, because shell culture is going to be different from IJVC culture. I'll give opportunity to others.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Wumi Iledari. He joined us from Ibadan Network Center. He is the president of the Nigerian Association for the Energy Economics, director of Emerald Energy Institute, University of Port Harcourt. We thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your time. Yesterday was your birthday, and the Good Morning Nigeria crew, we say happy birthday. Always a pleasure to have you join us on the program. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll continue with the program. We have some tweets that have come in. We'll take those tweets before we return to our two guests still with us here in the Abuja studios. Dosman tweets, corruption has been internalized in our oil industry, yet we seem to be a major player globally. Now, this is a discrepancy. Since NLNG shareholder structure is working, why can't we transfer the other arrangements on the JV to the same agreement?
Candy Prince tweets, problem in oil industry is one of the consequences of our wicked elites who fail to use our resources honestly for good investment. And
Kola Damilola tweets, review of most of these JV agreements to suit parties is the way forward, as suggested by Prof. A law should not be static.
And Ortega tweets, I think the right thing to do now is to reform the industrial system in Nigeria. Mismanagement is a real threat. Action should be taken.
Okay, those are the tweets that we can't take in the course of this conversation. Let's get back to our guest, Dr. Ojo Bunaya Ojo. Earlier, when you were speaking, you wanted to start proffering solutions on what NATIC would consider the way forward. Can we get your thoughts on this now?
Well, we have all agreed. I do think that there is a point where made here that the JV concept initially was good. Along the line of implementation, something has gone wrong. And NIT consistently thinks that we need to review our JV operations. We have made recommendations on what specifically can be done. Incorporation is one of them. There was also a thought that it could be funded independent from the capital market. There are other suggestions. It should be interrogated. We should open it up for debate. And ideas, experts can provide ideas on how, but to continue the way we are going is still a problem. And in course of this conversation, we've had us lay a lot of emphasis on capacity. That I agree, but there are other issues that help capacity to get resolved. What we need in the industry are just not competence, we also need integrity. If you have competency and you don't have integrity, there's a problem. If you have integrity and there is no competence, it's a challenge. So we need a mixture of competency and integrity in the management of the sector, and that's exactly where NIT stands. We've also made very specific recommendations on a number of issues which we think needs to be addressed. Some of them are being addressed under the ongoing reforms, but we need a lot more action, specifically on this. And the JV is one area that cannot wait. We need to review our JV operations.
All right.
And NIT has done extensive work, which is available, and the NNPC and all those who should have this report, they have the report. It just needs implementation. It's one of our remedial issues.
All right. Dr. Ojo Bunaya Ojo, Director of Communications of NATIC, would like to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on the program this morning.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And Dr. Evans Dirisu, well, again, let's get your closing thoughts, but along with that, very briefly, is there a sense in which we seem to be focused more on the revenue end? Oil brings money, and yet we're not concerned about the cost of getting that money, which is probably what explains what's happening and what we need to do to ensure that we pay the right cost, get the right persons to pay the right cost and monitor it. What is your suggestion on the way forward in addition to what you said before? Very briefly.
Yeah, I think you are right. Absolutely, we have only been concerned about what we get and have not been concerned about how much it costs us to earn this revenue. I think there's no question about it. The way to go, in my view, is incorporate the JVs. But the question arises, what do you do with nappings? NAPIMS has developed some skills, knowledge, and technology in monitoring the oil industry such that our costs are as low as they can possibly be, and also that our interest is safeguarded for the maximum revenue accruing to the Federation. My view on that is that NAPIMS should be kept as a management agency under the corporation. Where it resides is another matter. Because you also have production sharing contracts, which you require a strong, skilled team to ensure that the interest of the Federation is not
jeopardized.
Jeopardized.
All right. On that note, we'd like to thank Dr. Evan Zirisu, financial consultant and former staff of NAPIMS. We thank you for your insights on our contribution, on our conversation this morning.
Thank you very much.
All right, so on that note, would like to bring you up to date now with some sports news as Nigeria Football Federation sets dates and venues for Federation Cup semi-finals, and Segun Toriola picks 12 players for ITTF Junior Championship final screening. Our sports desk has more details on this.
Super Eagles technical advisor Gernot Rohr has reiterated that Nigeria will need all her